Walt, the stock market's hitting new highs. The IPO window keeps opening. Could we have a .com bubble? And the M&A in the media and telco space, it's on fire.
Yeah, it definitely is on fire. A lot to deal with this week. And I think later in this podcast, we'll touch on Elon's deal with SpaceX where he bought some spectrum. But first, Grayson, I want to talk about, one of these Road to Autonomy podcasts that I finally got around to listening to.
Do you have a confession to make, Walt? Did you finally come over to the oil and natural gas side and take a listen to my quarterly outlook?
I knew you were going to go there, but no, I did not listen to that one. That didn't fit in for me. I'm a nuclear guy, but I know you get great traction. And obviously, power is going to be an essential element to the success of autonomy. But no, I'm talking about the Qualcomm one where you interviewed the head of the ADAS and autonomous driving products from Qualcomm. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name. It was a great interview. And once again, just, adding to your library in Road to Autonomy, clearly the largest library of autonomy content in this space, bar none. So I don't know. It was really interesting, and there was a lot of things that kind of struck me there.
Thank you, and I will let you and our listeners in. The library's expanding. There's some big news coming in a few months of what we're doing with the library, so tune into that. What was it in the Qualcomm interview today? Was it Snapdragon digital chassis? Was it the AI? Was it the BMW? What was it?
I think it was his comment about, going into a car wash. And, I have a Tesla, and it's sometimes frustrating for me to try and figure out the windshield wipers and like a lot of stuff going in there, where I think what he was talking about is with AI and good audio, and not a lot of these cars have it. You can basically just talk to your car and say, hey, in his case, the example he gave is I'm going to a car wash. Rather than looking for it in the settings, you just say, put it in car wash mode. Or I think even you talked about, like, maybe you don't even have to tell the car that. If there's enough intelligence, it knows geographically and with maps that it's at the car wash and asks you on the screen, would you like to go into car wash mode? That was the interesting part of the conversation.
It's going to get there, but now I'm going to sound like an old geezer here. What the heck is car wash mode, and why do you need it?
I don't even know, but it's probably something that folds your side mirrors in and does something with the windshield wipers, and I guess make sure all the windows are closed so things don't get in there. But I mean, the issue was the integration of voice to what's going on in the car, and it made me think about, like, okay, yeah, that's important, and these are developments, and the fact that in my Tesla I already have Grok in my car, and then I'm like, and Grok has been great, but then I'm like, okay, but does Grok enable me to say, tell Grok to turn the lights on? Like, does it interact with what the car does, as opposed to just being like an AI answer machine in the car?
Over time, you're going to be able to. Today, you cannot. You have the two different systems. You have the Tesla voice system to control the car, and you have the Grok system. Over time, it will get integrated, and Grok will be able to control the whole Tesla vehicle by the voice, and hopefully, without having to hit the button, it can put it into FSD supervised mode for you as well.
And I just wonder if it's like agentic things. Like if you're talking to Grok about stuff you want done, once it integrates with what goes on in the car, is it using some of that agentic power? And then the question is, like, is there anything physically that has to be different in the car? Is this just going to be another one of those Tesla software upgrades that enables that kind of integration of Grok with the functionality of the car, as far as you know?
I believe, but I'll say this, that I'm not an engineer. I believe that Tesla, the software, has to give Grok the permissions, and it is a software update. But again, I'm not an engineer, but to me, looking at it, seems like it's a software update.
So what's fascinating about that is, if you think about how Waymo is dealing with car manufacturers, these are separate OEMs, and do the OEMs turn over, like, their system to a Gemini AI? Does it have to integrate into whatever systems that they're using in those cars that control the car, as opposed to the media that's in the car? Like, how does that work in terms of the future development of autonomous cars? Because Waymo has talked about, with this pseudo press release that they had with Toyota, doing private car ownership. How do they get there with some of these external OEMs?
A lot of bruises, a lot of battles, a lot of negotiations. And I'll give you a very public example. GM removed Apple CarPlay from the GM vehicles, and there was consumer outcry, but GM says we can build a better software experience. I don't think so. The Apple experience is better. And if you look at the updates that Apple is making on CarPlay, they want to control the vehicle. And at some point, the traditional OEMs and the software developers, and when I say software developers, I'm specifically mentioning Apple CarPlay and Google's Android Auto, are going to come to a head. The way that I believe we get over that hump is the consumer, and they're going to vote with their pocketbook. But until that point, there's going to be a back and forth battle.
I mean, it also just reminds me of kind of what I've seen in SpaceX with Starlink. And when you're making these satellites, which are the payload that go onto the rockets, they're effectively getting developed in the same area where the rockets are. So to the extent that they need to make tweaks in how that satellite sits on the rocket, it's right there. And it gives them an advantage, perhaps, to other satellite companies that want to put their payload on a SpaceX rocket, which they would do, but just don't have that integration. And I liken that again to this car thing where, you know, you have Grok, maybe it's just faster integration into benefiting from what AI can do, not only in just, you know, playing you music and answering you questions in the car, but integrating the car. That's got to be more challenging, you know, with these OEMs.
It's a lot more challenging, but Tesla is the OEM and they have a common owner, or not owner, large shareholder in Mr. Musk. So they're the clearest path to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's my point. But I'm just questioning, like, you know, how important that is going forward. And I guess even more specifically, you know, you have Gemini. We're still in the kind of early days of battles, you know, in terms of what LLM people want to adopt. Obviously, Elon's made a big deal about how Apple, in his mind, has restricted him from the App Store, and putting Grok in the Teslas obviously helps with this. You know, why is it that Gemini is not an option on the back screen of my Waymo today? I mean, I assume they control that software. Why shouldn't there be like a button to press Gemini and start asking it questions while you're taking one of these Waymo rides?
This is a humble opinion based on historical context. And I'm going to give you the historical context before I give you my humble opinion. Originally, when the Waymos were operating, before it was iHeartMedia, it was YouTube Music. Makes a lot of sense. Common owner in Alphabet. There's an individual who I will remain for privacy purposes, I won't mention his name publicly, asked to have it removed because he thought it, quote unquote, devalued the YouTube Music brand. Okay. Then they go to iHeartRadio, which you and I know was not a success. And then they go to Spotify and they just big Sabrina Carpenter rollout to announce it. And it seems like there's more success there. So the reason I'm giving you that, it seems like based on what happened with YouTube Music, it could be a cultural issue where perhaps the Gemini team doesn't see the value. That's pure speculation, but based on music, I could be right.
I don't know. I think that's a crazy viewpoint. I think you integrate Spotify into the car because it's the ecosystem, right? They're large there, and you can control your music. All I'm saying is, to the extent that Gemini is an answer engine, which is effectively, I think, I don't know how you're using Grok in your car, but I'm using it as an answer engine to put it in there. It doesn't have to control it. Obviously, you can't control anything in the car, right? It's autonomous. Like the Waymo you're in is autonomous, but at least get Gemini to have more exposure. And as people decide between OpenAI and Gemini and Grok, you know, that you push that one forward.
So if I'm in Alphabet shoes, and I think this decision has to be made at the Alphabet level, not the Waymo level, I want to integrate Gemini and use it as a way to sell more advertising to drive business to local businesses and get a cut of that revenue. That's where I'm going from the Alphabet level.
They're the same company, Grayson. You just said, like, I'm at Waymo versus Google. They are controlled and owned by this company. Like, are they going to say no if they're like, put Gemini in that car?
Walt, I'm sorry. You're missing the picture here. Politics. There is a lot of politics inside of Waymo. And I'll leave it at that.
Look, maybe it's not a huge deal, right, to have Gemini in the car. So, but just to pull that thread a little bit more in terms of politics. If there are in fact politics there, then like, how does that work going forward in getting, again, car manufacturers to integrate this stuff? I think didn't Applied Intuition, aren't they already working on something with OpenAI? And like, are you going to let OpenAI via Applied Intuition to come in here and kind of usurp your presence in cars? And remember, like, part of the benefit and part of the thing that we think changes the economy with autonomous cars is you have all this excess time spent right in the car to deal with media and make some advertising dollars perhaps that way. Like, so why why shouldn't this be, as they continue to ramp these things, it seems like it's an easy thing. Like Grok just appeared in my Tesla. Why shouldn't Gemini just appear in the back of Waymos?
It should. And you're 100% right about Applied Intuition. They have contracts with 18 leading OEMs, some of the largest OEMs in the world, including Porsche. And they have the contract with OpenAI. And let's not forget the co-founder of Applied Intuition, Kasser, was the COO of Y Combinator when Sam was incubating OpenAI. So that relationship is very strong. And yes, they are quietly, I'll say quietly, they are very quietly going into that market, and they will be a very big force to be reckoned with because of the 18 OEM partnerships. And furthermore, on that point, Applied Intuition is the software powering a lot of those vehicles.
Let's move past the kind of Waymo robotaxi fleet. And again, think about this over the long term, going back to the topic we were before in terms of private ownership. If Gemini, if, OpenAI, if Grok can actually do the complex agentic tasks to run the car, right? For media or things that you want to do. Take me here, take me there, like put me together a trip that's going to get me there, fuel me up, whatever, pick up a burrito, like stop by my, my favorite Jersey Mike's on the way, like plan all that stuff out and make it as easy as what you talked about with the gentleman from Qualcomm. How does that work in terms of getting to production? Like we're still here waiting for Waymo to stop like receiving cars and outfitting them at a plant with your sensors and getting them off of the production line. We know how the auto manufacturers work in terms of moving slowly with their operating systems, as you talked about, and making decisions like pushing, Apple's CarPlay out to develop their own. Like, does this get back to the fact that, those long-term relationships that Google has or Waymo has with OEMs need to shift and basically just go to a purpose-driven car, contract manufactured, with Gemini as kind of the root experience in that car, even on a private ownership basis?
Yes. And that's why I think at some point, pure speculation, I'll give you a prediction, at some point, Foxconn will ramp up their autonomous vehicle ambitions and go into that sector because Foxconn, at the end of the day, cares about building the product, the physical product, not the software. So yes, at some point, contract manufacturing will become a dominant presence in this industry.
We've kind of discounted Professor X Auto, Tensor now. They're going down that path. I mean, there's no one else. I mean, Neuro was kind of going down that path, but their delivery robots and have basically recoiled from that. And their founders have talked about the fact that that's not the way to go. Is it possible that Tensor ends up being kind of the canary in the coal mine because, they're embracing that route?
Could, very could. And I say could because they have the relationship with VinFast. The vehicles are going to be manufactured in Vietnam. So you have the ability to manufacture. The question that we do not know yet, how much capital, if any capital, will VinFast put in and what type of output will they guarantee them a year and what sort of distribution will they get with that? Those are all questions that we don't know, but they're all possibilities.
Clearly, this is something that at least I need to do more work on because my guess is that the feedback we're going to get this week is like, look, the media system and how that works is very separate than what's driving the car, right? And I get that, but I just wonder how over time these things can integrate together because obviously they're, again, in terms of private ownership, and again, as you discussed, on that call, which I encourage our listeners to, to take a listen to, I think there's some value in that.
There's value. We what we do know, things are going to change. I do not believe, I've done work for one of the largest major airlines, and so I can tell you without naming the airline, you have the critical system that flies the plane, and you have the in-flight entertainment system, the IFE, and the commandant. And I was very fortunate. I got to go to a teardown of 747. The wires never touch or never connect for safety purposes. At some point in a car, they will. So I don't think you're going to have the airline level, but you're going to have some interesting software that acts as firewalls to enable that.
Grayson, let's move on to the happenings this week. I think this week, last week I joked about having winner of the week. I don't think there was really any news out of Waymo, so I think Tesla is our winner of the week between the two giants. Had a couple of news. You want to go through some of those things?
We did. So now the heavyweight fight is now officially tied 1-1. We got a report out of Politico this week that Tesla is applying for permits to deploy ride hailing. And I want to say for the audience, yes, I know there is a driver behind the wheel and it's a different classification according to the California Public Utilities Commission. Nevertheless, they've applied for a permit to operate at the Oakland Airport, the San Francisco Airport, commonly known as SFO, in San Jose. We also saw videos on X where Tesla is testing highway robotaxi in the Phoenix metropolitan region. And we got a report from Sawyer Merritt on X that was verified by TechCrunch in the Nevada Department of Transportation that Tesla has secured a permit to test robotaxi in the state of Nevada.
Well, that was quite an information dump. So 3 separate things. The California expansion. I mean, no offense, but this is a yawn, right? I mean, it's just, you're in your Tesla, there's a safety driver there. Like, that expansion is just not really that interesting to me. And how many robotaxis do they really even have on the road for it to make that a realistic service? So that's really, to me, a nothing burger. Nevada also, it's good to get some permits or what have you, but like, again, not a huge surprise. So not a nothing burger, but not a huge surprise. They have the boring tunnel, right? So we kind of talked about the importance or the interest in that market. Obviously, the ODD would be broader than just the tunnel, just like Zoox had started out with which we'll get to later. But I guess I'm most interested in the stuff from Phoenix, but not maybe the way you would think, which is, you said that they were testing on the highway, but I think those pictures, Grayson, were of robotaxis with those gigantic cameras, the stuff that we've shared videos with in Tesla in Austin when they were expanding there. So what's with these cars that have these kind of, I think there's LiDAR on them as well, right? LiDARs and cameras that are driving around Phoenix. What is the purpose of those cars?
You are correct, and they're Luminar solid-state LiDARs on there. They're validation cars. They're validating the system for getting ready for that expansion. So when you look at that, it is a clear indicator that Tesla is getting ready to expand and open Phoenix robotaxi service. And if you look back in history, we saw the same photos around Austin that we're seeing now in Phoenix. So I will go on the record and say, so today is September 12th, Friday. By November 1st, they're operating a service, driver out. But when I say driver out, this goes back to Walt's Corner with the terminology. There will be a safety attendant in the passenger seat by November 1st, operating in Phoenix. And I will give you a prediction of an ODD roughly 50 square miles.
Well, that's wonderful, and thank you for those predictions. And I think that's great for our Tesla bulls that are watching. But I'm going to take this a different way, which is, there was a narrative that, as you prove out Austin and expand, that it's like we're going to light up similar markets, and there's not additional testing. So, like, is this going to happen in every market where you have to? I think the word you used was validate with LiDAR and go market by market, because I think that's a very different expansion process than I think many believe. I know when we've discussed this before, I said, yeah, there'll be similar markets, and obviously you go to New York and there's going to be a validation process, so it'll be a lot more methodical. So we've discussed this on this podcast before, but here's just another example. I mean, is Phoenix, no offense to people in Phoenix and Austin, but how different is Phoenix from Austin, and why does that need to be additionally validated before you launch there?
The blunt answer, Walt, it's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. I would do it if I was calling the shots. Point blank. I think it's the right thing. It's the smart thing to do. It goes back to their focus on safety. If you look at the way that Phoenix is designed from a layout perspective, there's a reason. And Gary McCarthy, who was a chief of police there, and now he's head of law enforcement for Aurora, he would tell you it's the roads are wide, the way they're designed, they're well maintained. So it's a really great proving ground. That's one of the main reasons outside of policy why Waymo initially launched there.
Look, and I'm not saying it's not what they should do, and I agree with you. And I think it does underscore the culture of safety, which I think people do not give them credit for. But on the flip side, for people that are very bullish on Tesla, when you talk about like, just lighting up the entire country overnight, like, look, here they are in Phoenix doing validation. So you have to, measure your expectations for a more methodical approach, which is, again, I think the right thing to do. And, hopefully people don't use this as a reason to like once again, claim, oh, this is why they should shut everything down. Yeah, they should shut everything down because they're being safe and and validating a market. But we do get those nonsensical inbounds.
You hit the nail on the head. Take a measured approach, because on one side you have the Tesla things and then the one side you have the Waymo Wiz. We had the heavyweight fight last week. A measured approach. That's what we need to look at every company in this from a measured approach. Elon was busy. He's busy all the time. He was launching robotaxis in Phoenix, getting ready to launch in Nevada. And then lo and behold, he's got a company called SpaceX. And I see a headline pop up. He spends $19 billion to buy Spectrum from EchoStar. And then next thing I know, I get a note from you from Lightshed. I see something. You talk about connectivity and robotaxi. So I had to put on my I Spy hat. And I start going into this. You're very smart. You're wearing your inspector hat. Well, I'm impressed here.
Yeah, this has long been in my wheelhouse in terms of our coverage on both these names. But, look, the interesting thing is 19 billion is pocket change, but no one really expected him to spend that much for Spectrum. It's going to take time for this to play out. For those of us out there that are in the U.S., you're paying a lot for your service. These telcos have really fat EBITDA margins. And there could be a scenario that plays out over the next couple of years where you would buy, Grayson, a Starlink phone. I mean, hopefully he can work out the technology with Apple and Samsung. But you know how Elon is, like with Apple and Samsung. If these guys don't play ball, who knows? Maybe he goes into considering making a phone of himself. And I think the common thread here, it all ties back to the importance of Grok. Grok appeared in my Tesla. Grok is obviously going to be an important element of phones and service connectivity. And in terms of our world of autonomy, 100% what you just pointed out. It wasn't a major point of the note, but there is going to be connectivity for the robo fleet and Optimus robots. I think Elon talked about that. And right now, I think there's AT&T, that when you think about all the services you're getting in your Tesla today, I'm pretty sure that's going over AT&T's network. To be able to backfill that onto satellite spectrum or their Starlink constellation, which again, it's going to take a couple years for this version of the constellation, but definitely an interesting development for the company.
Well, I got to put on my hat for the audience and ask you a question. What is Spectrum, and why would somebody pay $19 billion for it?
Spectrum is basically the airwaves that make your phone work. It's kind of like when you tune your radio. How does the music get to the radio? It's the capacity, it's the land required for connectivity. Now, look, for autonomous cars, most of the processing is going to occur in the car, but there's a lot of extra services that we're all dealing with, like when you're listening to Spotify in your car or getting your Grok answers back and forth. It's going to want to connect to the broader network.
Now I've got to put my policy hat on here. How is Brendan Carr and the FCC going to think about this?
I mean, I think it's great if you have, a real competitor to an industry that has very fat margins. Again, not the primary reason for this. I mean, I think in most cases the telcos will be partners, but there is an opportunity, which Elon addressed during the All In podcast, where you could be buying your services directly from them. And we know, look, we've seen the success that they've had in selling Starlink direct to consumers and selling Tesla direct to consumers without any advertising and with their distribution channels that they have. So it's a strong capability at the company for sure.
I don't study the market as much as you do, but I will say this. It seems like Elon and company, at some point, all of his companies are going to work together. So we thank you for, let's call it Spectrum Corner. Now we're going to get back to Autonomy Markets, because that's what we know. Zoox, if you want to call it the little company that could, the toaster, the brave little toaster company, the green, whatever company you want to call it, they opened limited service in Las Vegas this week. Even got a post from Andy Jassy on X. When I say limited, Walt, it's pre-select destinations. If you and I want to go to the Cosmopolitan, can't do that. We want to go to the Sphere, can't do that. Extremely limited service. And I want to read the stops before I get your opinion here that you can go to. Resort World Las Vegas, Area 15. Not Area 51, but 15. Topgolf, New York, Luxor. What value does that create?
First of all, I had a very busy week, and I did see a lot of stuff on Twitter, and I think you're right. The fact that Andy Jassy tweeted about it, I'm like, oh, what was this big announcement? Because they were already operating in Las Vegas. So it didn't seem like something that different. They're not even charging for rides, right? So they're not like opening commercial service there yet. Not, they don't have the choice to, I guess, because of regulations in that market. But if it's point-to-point service, it's not really what we traditionally consider in terms of autonomy. I mean, that's in the world of glideways, and how glideways is going to provide connectivity to the San Jose airport along a dedicated path. This is not a dedicated path. They're going on the public roads, but still, it's not autonomy in the sense that we think of it, And what do you think in terms of square mileage that ODD represents, just for comparison's sake?
I downloaded the Zoox app, put my information, and was able to get a hold of the map in the app. So I'm assuming, and looking at the map, that we're looking at 10 to 20 square miles, and I would probably hone in closer to the 10 side, but 10 to 20 square miles, so very small ODD.
20, I think, sounds, at the high end, sounds similar to what Tesla did in Austin. But again, if it's point-to-point service, like a bus stop, then it's not really a fair comp. So I'm not even sure it's worth discussing the ODD.
It's not worth discussing, and I want to highlight in an interview with The Verge, when the editors pushed back, oh, when is this going to change? They said, oh, more fixed destinations are coming online. They avoided the question around go anywhere you want service. So it seems like it's just going to be a fixed destination for a long time.
So is that the model? I mean, is that the Zoox model, that it's not autonomy as we see it today with Waymo, as we're seeing it developed with Tesla and others? Is it just, are they basically just like trying to compete with glideways now, right? Point to point locations.
We don't know. We would like clarity. And as I said a few weeks ago, it's like a Disneyland ride. There's no other way to describe it. What's the value in it?
I mean, I think there is value. I mean, when I talk to glideways about the business model that they're in and the cost to cities of these buses and trains, there's a lot of studies that talk about how having smaller vehicles for public transportation. But in that case, the buyers of those systems are governments. They're not necessarily individual consumers. It's just a different business model. It may still work, and I think it probably works a little bit better in markets that have not yet invested in any infrastructure in terms of public transportation, when they're thinking about new public transportation investments.
I question the value of fixed routes. May Mobility used to do that, and now they're operating a robotaxi service. This week, they launched on the Lyft network in Midtown Atlanta, a 7 square mile ODD. Big positive step. What do you think?
But what's the lesson learned? I mean, the lesson learned is a positive one. They did point to point. They booked revenue with cities, and now they've evolved to have a deal with Lyft where it's not point to point. It's actually an ODD. Yes, it's relatively small, 7 square miles versus what Tesla did in Austin with 20. But that's a positive lesson learned. That's where you start, maybe.
Yes, but May Mobility never had Amazon capital behind them.
Well, that's fair in that May started with point to point with very little capital. They've been very capitally efficient. In fact, Ed Olson was all over the place this week. It seems like he did every podcast known to man, and I saw him on CNBC. So did a media blitz. Maybe this is an opportunity for them to launch with Lyft and with all this IPO activity, get some additional capital in the company. But maybe that is the path for these companies. You're saying that you'd rather see like a neuro path or a wave path, but you're right in the mixer, right? Not doing select path, but just being available in an ODD.
You have to be available. You have to be able to go where you want. Staying on the theme of public markets, how did the market react to Lyft on this news?
I think there was some reaction. I definitely got some inbounds there, just asking to get refreshed on May. As a reminder to our listeners, Grayson and I have both been in the May card in Ann Arbor with the driver out. We had an exceptional ride there, but then I also tested it, in their public trials. In my case, in Arlington, I went, and it was more of like what you just described, where it was stopped. Like I saw my car going by, where my location was, and I had to walk to where the location, because it was effectively on this route. I think we saw a video in Atlanta where they had to deal with a company where there was literally a dedicated lane in the concept of what glideways is doing. But in this case, again, they're progressing the product forward, and this should seem, this should be a positive for them. And we'd obviously love to see that. It'll be interesting to see how quickly that 7 can expand to 20 and 30, right? I believe that the company, believes in their technology and does see kind of a hockey stick expansion of cars and ODDs. So you got to start somewhere, Grayson. And, this is where they're starting.
Yes, and you and I know, and this is, and May's made this very public, they had the ability to scale because they had the relationship with Toyota. Toyota is going to manufacture those vehicles in Ohio. No tariffs, American-made vehicles, scaling. And the interesting part on this that hasn't been talked about, hybrid vehicles, not all electric vehicles.
I didn't realize that was part of it. Yeah, that's huge because of that third leg of the stool that we often refer to, which is the charging and maintenance of these things. Having hybrid vehicles is I think, critical. Just as a quick aside, I think I hopefully said ODD a lot here. I know I've accidentally said ODM. So thanks to all the spell checkers in our audience that were pointing out my inability to say ODD because of my long history in telco. Although ODM is not really a telco term either. It's like OEM. So I think I'm getting all my acronyms mixed up. But just because I call it an ODM doesn't mean I know what an ODD is. But thanks anyway for your spell checking comments.
You could call it alphabet soup. You call it anything you want. I'll still be your friend.
And look, I'm also going to make up my own terminology for safety driver and safety attendant, and I'm sticking to it. I mean, this is the leading podcast in autonomy. The guy in the driver's seat is the safety driver. The one in the passenger seat is safety attendant. I'm digging in my heels on that one. That is the terminology that we will be using for now, and we recommend the rest of the industry fall in line.
I like that. Well done, Walt. I want to stay on May here for a moment because May, as far as I know, is the only company that has a deal with Lyft and has a deal with Uber. You mentioned Arlington, Texas. May has been operating there since 2021. That was operating on the Via app, which was in the process of Via's going public. How is May make the decisions to allocate vehicles to the Uber network, which they're launching in Arlington later this year, and to Lyft, where they're currently operating? Because you and I have talked about Waymo has these issues. How are they going to allocate vehicles?
Well, May doesn't have any say in that. It's where Uber allocates the vehicles to the driver. And, Uber is obsessed with their 5 or 10 minute pickup time, which is, in my personal experience, absurd because they tell you it's 5 or 10 minutes and it's not. It rarely is. I mean, I don't know if anyone's done studies there. My comments are all anecdotal, but I think this is the challenge that Waymo has faced in some of these markets. There's still not a separate Waymo tier. There's no way there's going to be a May tier until they ramp those products or ramp those number of cars. You're just going to get assigned, I think, when you pick one of the existing categories that Uber, or in the case of Atlanta, Lyft have in this market.
That's a good analysis. What I was getting at is when the vehicles come off the line from Toyota, who makes a decision whether they're going on the Lyft network or the Uber network before they go into service?
I mean, there's got to be some contractual obligations, and I think May's probably mentality around this is like, Grayson, don't worry about it. We're going to just try and crank out as many cars as possible to satisfy the demand that we have with our rideshare partners.
Well, let's continue to watch it because it'll be very interesting to see how that evolves, especially as we get later into the year.
Hold on, but let me interrupt on you there, Grayson, and just make one other positive comment. I mean, May Mobility already has that relationship with Toyota. There is a roadmap to getting to these, production level cars. Let's compare that to the leading autonomy company in the country right now, Waymo, where all we've had is a pseudo press release about talking about doing something with Toyota. Again, they're still outfitting Jaguars and Chinese Zeekr cars with sensors. They have 0 cars coming off of any production lines themselves today. And that is going to be a critical unlock. We believe that they're going to get there, but there's, even more and more factors that we're going to talk about, like we did earlier in terms of the integration of Gemini and other things. And, the process of getting there to get to production level, because obviously that's a very important part to really take autonomy to the next level in this country and globally.
It is. May has the contract. You and I have met with him. We've seen the vehicles. We got the schematics of the factory. And on the Waymo front, that hasn't been discussed in any autonomy podcast yet or in the news, Waymo now has a Hyundai risk. Because we don't know, after the incident that happened, what risk that could be. And could that slow down potentially the Ioniq 5s?
The incident you're talking about, because I don't know why we'd have to dance around this, is there was an ICE raid on one of their manufacturing plants, I don't think for the cars. I think it was a battery plant. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the company I think, oddly talked about like shutting down the plant or stopping the plant because of not getting labor. It was almost, to me, defiant to the administration. Not, I think, a successful tact you want to go. I mean, I would refer maybe to seeing Tim Cook thank the president 8 times at dinner, among other CEOs that were there. Like, and you're gonna like basically effectively try and embarrass the administration to talk about how you're shutting down, or I don't know if it was a shutdown or a delay based on, you know, the raids that occurred at that facility.
Sometimes you just got to play politics. You got to swallow your pride and do what's best for the company and best for your shareholders.
Right, and maybe best for the shareholders was getting the cheap labor that they were getting, but you know, there is obviously labor in the U.S. that they could. I don't know the specifics about the situation, but from a press standpoint, it felt like an unforced error in terms of their communication about what happened there.
Big time. While we don't know specifics, we do know that we will be monitoring the situation to see if there is any slowdown at the Savannah plant, if there's any repercussions. That we will be monitoring.
At the end of the day, what the administration wants is just more manufacturing. So, to the extent that these Hyundais are going to get made in the U.S., that should, I was going to say, trump all other factors, pun not intended. And that should be the most important thing. And I think it will for this administration. But, you know, don't tempt fate by, like, you know, doing stuff or saying stuff that's not, I think, productive, to work together to get Hyundais on the road as quickly as possible. There are other OEMs out there.
Administration is very clear. They want manufacturing jobs here in America. And let's shift gears here to autonomous trucking, Walt, where jobs are being created in America. This week, Kodiak announced they shipped their first Roush upfitted autonomous truck to Atlas Energy in the Permian Basin. That goes out to my oil and gas friends. First truck, it's owned on Atlas balance sheet. It's part of 100 truck delivery. And we got some really interesting stats from Kodiak this week following that announcement. Kodiak has completed over 3,000 hours of paid driverless operations. Here's the key, Walt. Not a single human soul in the cab. Atlas Energy is currently operating 8 Kodiak autonomous trucks, which Atlas Energy owns the trucks on their balance sheet. Kodiak is getting a licensing fee. And Kodiak has successfully completed over 3 million autonomous miles. Big week for them.
I mean, I know our listeners that are involved with Aurora, you know, firmly believe that they're years ahead of Kodiak. But those are pretty good stats that you just talked about. And clearly, I think, direct shots at Aurora. No one in the cab, 8 trucks, right? And you have Atlas Energy actually being the one that owns a truck, which is stuff we've talked about in terms of a business model that I've wondered in the past. Like, is someone going to want to own a truck where there's no actual driver in the truck? So, you know, I think interesting thing there. I think obviously Kodiak's in the process of a SPAC. I don't know. At some point, they're going to effectively be a public company, and that thing will be de-SPACed or whatever the proper terminology is for that. But certainly, obviously, interesting details there. I also saw there was some progress at Plus, where they started some autonomous fleet trials between Laredo and Dallas on the I-35. That's a 7-hour drive, I believe. It's over 400 miles. So, you know, good progress for Plus, who's, I think, also going through a SPACing process to go public. So it feels like there's momentum for them as well.
There's clearly momentum for autonomous trucking. We're about to go from 1 to 3 publicly traded autonomous trucking companies. From an analyst who covers Wall Street, how are you thinking about the industry?
That is always the best situation. You want as many players in that space as possible, because that is more likely to drive investor attention, regardless of the variety of market caps. I think it's going to put more pressure on Aurora to provide more updates. I mean, you know, last week I talked about Chris Urmson speaking at a conference. He didn't really say that much. So, you know, there's going to be more pressure as Kodiak gets out there. Obviously, they're willing to talk more about details and trucks. It's going to put more pressure on Aurora to get more trucks on the road, open up more lanes, go to more markets, provide more regular updates on, you know, what's going on with Volvo. Take investors out to, you know, to see the Volvo plant and what's going on there, and maybe set stuff up with PACCAR to give us some more sense of how this market evolves. I'd love to go see one of these transfer points where, you know, they go from the autonomous truck to the final, you know, the delivery at the end, and how, you know, get a good sense of how that will evolve over time. So, but I think as a result, this is good, and there'll be some sniping between companies, just like we see on the car side between the Tesla and the Waymo people. There's going to be sniping back and forth. Like I said in a past podcast, the bigger issue here is the market opportunity for everybody. Yes, some of these companies will fail and cease to exist in 5 years. But for the moment, what everyone should be focusing on is the opportunity to save lives and obviously in trucking to increase productivity and lower cost. And hopefully that will be the end result as we talk more about autonomous trucking over the next, you know, 6 to 12 months.
The bottom line is autonomy is good for the economy, and soon we will usher in the autonomy economy. Each and every week, while you and I are here breaking down the autonomy markets, what do we need to look for in the markets over the coming week?
I mean, so it was a quiet week for Waymo. Like I said, Tesla won this week in terms of their incremental news, even though some of it was a little bit of a yawn. But, you know, I'd love to maybe see San Francisco open up. Maybe someone pressure the mayor there, which I think is the new mayor in San Francisco has generally been well received for cleaning up some of the streets. Maybe talk about getting the airports. Maybe Waymo just goes to the highways before having the airports queued up. I don't know. I think we just need to hear something out of Waymo for next week. What do you think?
I'd love to hear Waymo news, and I just want to put my policy wonk hat on. The mayor does not have the legal authority to grant permits for the airport solely. It goes to a commission. So we'd like to see that, but it's going to be a long throw.
But you could say that about the president doesn't have authority to do a lot of things, but he uses his leadership position to get things done. Does the mayor have no ability to do that in San Francisco?
The mayor of San Francisco has done a phenomenal job cleaning the city up. Tourism is coming back. RevPAR, that's the metric, that revenue per available room that hotels are measured by, that's going up. The economy is coming back. So, yes, he does have the political clout, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, let's get it done. Let's get to the San Francisco airport.
Let's get it done. Waymo, Walt and I want to be one of the first riders at SFO, because we'll fly out and get picked up in a Waymo, and then we'll make an Autonomy Markets podcast in there, and we'll promote it. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is the autonomy economy. Walt, until next week.